Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. Specifically, we've been dealing with weapons which you throw, but which stay on the battlefield. Specifically, there's three of them, the two sorts of machete and the broom. Unlike a grenade, when you throw a grenade, the grenade is destroyed. When you throw a broom or a machete, it isn't destroyed. It's still there, and you can, if you manage to do that, you can go into the area where it is and pick it up. And we've been trying to code all of that stuff. So I've started a combat. As you can see, I had a broom. I threw a broom at one of the enemies, and I'm now about to move. I'm going to retreat, and as of the previous video, we didn't have any code for making sure that the weapons behave as they should when you move, because remember that the player character's position is always position 0. And so we currently have stored that this broom is in position 1, but if the player character moves, which space in the sort of imaginary battlefield, which one is position 1 will change. The player character will move to this band here, and that will become distance 0, and that will become distance 1, and that will become distance 2. And if we just have it stored that this is distance 1 and we don't update it, then the broom will move. And of course, that's not what we want to happen. That's not what would happen in real life. So we need to put in some code to make sure that the broom seems to stay where it is, by updating its position to the new value of sort of this bit here. We also need to have some code that allows the player character to pick up the broom if they find themselves in the same area. So let's deal with the first bit first. I'm going to press retreat, and if the code works, then we'll find that the broom is still with enemies 1, 2, 5, and 6. So I choose retreat, and yep, we can see that this is now, this distance band is now distance 2, but the broom, like the enemies, are sort of where they should be. The player character has moved back, and the enemies are where they are, where they should be. So now the other thing that I talked about is coding, getting into this position and picking up the broom. I'm not going to demonstrate that because I've found in playtesting that it's a very unlikely outcome. Usually what happens is enemies keep coming forward, and because one of the rules in this is that you can't move the player character into an area that has enemies. So the enemies will keep coming forward until they're killed, or the enemy will die, or the enemies will all run away before you get a chance to pick up the object. So it's very unlikely to happen, but of course, since it can happen, we need to have code for it. And of course, also the player might, the person whose game this is might want to change the game so that it becomes more likely. But even if it's unlikely, of course, we need to have code for it. So let's X out of this, and I'll show you the code. So first of all, I'll deal with the code for updating the position of the thrown weapon. That is in PC moves, which is over here. Let's zoom in so it's a bit easier to see. So we have a little note here which explains what happens. Other than the PC, the player character, everyone's position and that of any thrown weapons changes by Z. Z is just a number that's either +1 or -1, and it changes everyone's position so that in terms of what is presented on the battlefield, nothing seems to move other than the player character. And it's very straightforward, and we just do it the same way we do it with the other objects in the game. So here we have the companions, we have a for loop, and we just add Z to the relevant value. And that's what we do here. We have a for loop that goes, excuse me, there we go. We have a for loop that goes from 1 to thrown 0, THROWN 0. You'll remember that that is a slot in the array where we're keeping track of how many objects have been thrown and are on the battlefield. Usually there'll be only one, but of course, again, there might be more than one, and because there's a chance that it will happen, we need to have code to deal with that possibility. And then we set thrown y, which is the variable we're using for the for loop, thrown y2, which is its position, plus equals z. Plus equals just means set the value of this variable, or in this case, a slot within a variable, set that value to its current value plus z. You'll notice, by the way, that thrown 0 looks like a slot in a one-dimensional array, whereas thrown y2, that's got two indexes there, so it looks like a variable in a two-dimensional array. In some languages, you couldn't do that. Any given variable has to be either one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or whatever. We can do that in Twine, because the way that we create a two-dimensional array is we set up the individual slots as themselves being arrays. And we don't have to, usually we would do that to every slot, because usually if you want a two-dimensional array, you want every array to be a slot. But we decided that we'll make slot 0 a special slot which just keeps track of how many of the other slots are being used. So we can have that as a one-dimensional array and have this one as a two-dimensional array. So that would be 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 4. That'd probably be the maximum. And it doesn't cause any sort of errors as it would in another language. So that's keeping the objects where they should be. We also have to have code for picking it up, which I haven't finished. There's two sort of parts to that. We have to have code that presents a button which says that the player character can pick it up, and then we have to have the code for actually updating the variables. I've done the first but not the second. And that is where all the other player character buttons are, which is, sorry, that's the wrong one. That's the one we were looking at. It's in player character. So this is the page that gives us the buttons to advance, retreat, look in our inventory, give an order, swap weapons, etc. And we just add another button to the bottom. There's no particular order in which I've done this. I've mostly just added things to the end as I've come up with new options. Perhaps the person whose game this is will want to swap them into what they see as a more logical order. I guess we'll have to see. All right, so when do we have the option to pick up a weapon? Well, you don't have the option to pick up a weapon if the player character's hands are full. And what the player character is carrying is stored in $weapon 0 and $offhand 0. $weapon being their main hand and $offhand being what you'd expect, their offhand. It's an array because we keep track of this for the player characters and for any companions. And slot 0 is the player character's slot. So if they have at least one hand free, well then we need to check if there's any weapons in the any thrown weapons lying on the ground that the player character can pick up. So we do that with a for loop that goes from 1 to thrown 0. So once again, just look in every slot of thrown that we're using. And for each of those slots, we say, is thrown Z2 equal to 0? Because thrown Z2 is the position of that particular thrown weapon, and 0 is always the position of the player character. So if that's the case, then we do a couple of things. Each of these sets of buttons is going to have its own line. And so we have a break. And if you've been following this series, you might remember that there's a little bit of a problem when you have a button on two consecutive lines. They tend to overlap a little bit, at least with the default. I mean, you can change the appearance of buttons, so you can change it so this isn't the case. But with the default display, having one line break's not enough, but having two looks a bit too spaced out. So what I do is I have a single line break, and then I have another line break where the font is at 15% of its normal size. So that just makes a little gap, which I find looks better. So what are we going to do here? So we found a weapon that is lying on the ground next to the player character in slot 0. So we're going to do two things. We're going to say if weapon 0 is equal to 0, then we create a button to pick it up to your main hand. And if offhand 0 is 0, meaning their offhand is free. And you can see this one's a bit more complicated. There's these other requirements as well, which I'll get to once I finish talking about this button. If that's the case, then we create a button that is for picking up that weapon to the offhand. So let's look at this this button. It's one of those things where we print a string of text, which becomes code. So I'll just go through what it will print out, and that will make it a bit easier to see. I'll also put in some line breaks, even though there aren't any line breaks here, just to make the code a bit more spaced out and easier to follow. So we have the those less than what are they, characters, which enclose Twine specific commands as opposed to HTML or JavaScript commands. We have button, then we have that top left to bottom right slash, which indicates we put that in before a quote, and that indicates that this quote isn't ending the text. We actually want you to put the character of the quotation mark as part of the text. So it'll print that. Then we have this bit of code. So this is another one where we have a variable within a variable. We have thrown Z1, that is what type of weapon it is, and then we look in WEA_OVR, that number of the weapon 0, and that'll be the name of the weapon. So it'll be something like, usually, well, actually it'll be broom or machete because they're the only ones that can be thrown. So let's say it's broom to main hand. We have another quote. We have a space. You can't really see it, but if you can see it if you do that. Then we have another quote, pick up, yet another quote. Now I'll sort of lay this out in a way that it isn't laid out really, but that'll make it easier to see. Set Z equals whatever Z is. That is the slot in the thrown array that we're going to be, or the slots in the thrown array that we're going to be looking at. So let's say set Z equals 3. Set Y equals 1, and then slash button. So that this command will print something like this, which Twine will then recognize is Twine code, and it will turn that into a button. So what we see is what we saw on the player character screen for advance and retreat and shoot, etc. It's just different text and a different destination. So it's a button. The first bit is the text that appears on the button. So it'll be something like broom to main hand. This is the destination, pick up, which we haven't done yet. We set Z equals 3 and Y equal to 1, and then we close off the button. So what are Z and Y? Well, they're variables that we're going to need on the pickup page. Z, as I said, being the slot in the thrown array that we're dealing with, and Y equals 1, that's to indicate that we're putting it into our main hand. Now, this code here is identical, except that it says to offhand, and it sets Y to 2 to indicate that we're putting it in the offhand instead of the main hand. So why, this is the final bit of the code, why is this if more complicated than this if? Why do we have only one requirement here, which is that they have their main hand free, and here we have several requirements? Well, it's because of how we deal with two-handed weapons. Oh my goodness, sorry, this mouse is really playing up. There we go. It's how we deal with two-handed weapons. You can't have a two-handed weapon in your offhand. You're always assumed to be holding it in your main hand. And you can't have any weapon in your offhand if your main weapon hand is two-handed. Of course, if you think about it, if you're holding a machine gun with two hands, well, of course, you can't then pick up a shotgun and hold it in your offhand. So the two requirements are, first of all, we look at thrown Z1, which is the type of weapon. Then we look at WEA_OVR, that number of weapon 3, which is the handedness of a given weapon. So the weapon that we are wanting to pick up that's lying on the ground has to be one-handed. And we look at weapon 0, the weapon in our main hand, and then we look at WEA_OVR, which stands for weapon overview, that weapon 3, and that has to be one-handed as well. So the weapon in our main hand has to be one-handed, and it will evaluate as one-handed if we're not holding any weapon. We'll count that as fists or something. So if we've got a one-handed weapon in our main hand or no weapon in our main hand, and the weapon that we want to pick up is one-handed and our offhand is free, then and only then we have a button to pick up the weapon into our offhand. And that prints the two buttons if it's relevant to us. Obviously, all that happens when you press those buttons is it says error. There's no such page because I haven't coded no such passage. I keep calling them pages. There's no such passage. And of course, my next task is that I'm going to code how to pick up the weapons. And after that, I will be moving on to other special characteristics of weapons, which I haven't yet coded. But I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you. And I hope you will tune in next time.